Alright, so this is your introduction to beads. Some protective equipment. You have to have glasses on, but these are different glasses than the glasses you use over in the hot shop. These are neodymium. So this torch, when you start melting glass, will give off a little flare, and that flare is harmful for your eyes. Kind of like when you have to weld, you have to wear the protective goggles for welding. Same kind of thing. You have to protect your eyes, not just physically, but just from that flare will actually burn your retina, so that you want to stay away from that. We're gonna make a bead on something called a mandrel. This is a clean mandrel. I'm gonna show you how we put a bead release on this, and this is a bead rod. So this is the color we're gonna use to make the bead, and this is another color that we're gonna use to make the bead. This is a torch. It's propane and oxygen mixed, and then gives us a pretty hot flame. This is bead release. I'm gonna open it right now. Sometimes you'll have this pre-dipped. I don't, so I'm just showing you how we do it. All right, so clean mandrel, in, out. We have bead release on there. All right, so it's wet. So we have to dry the bead release before we can try to put melted glass onto it. So it looks like this. So I'm gonna go into about this top of the flame. So you'll see the color changing as it dries. So while that's finishing up drying, I'm gonna preheat my glass. If I take this glass and I put it straight into the flame, it's gonna go through something called thermal shock. When it goes through thermal shock, it's just gonna pop, all right? Then you're gonna hit your arm, or it's gonna pop and hit your neighbor. No one's gonna like that. So you wanna heat it up slowly, all right? So you kind of preheat it. You go in and out of the flame. All right, in and out of the flame. That's what's gonna warm it up slowly. And as that's getting hot, I'm gonna preheat my my mandrel. So my bead release is dry. All right, so I'm just gonna preheat. The hot glass wants to stick to something that's hot. All right, it's not gonna stick to something that's cold. So now you can start to see my glass is getting way hotter, and it's starting to melt. So I'm gonna melt a bit of glass color. And you wanna stay about this middle point of the flame, okay? Up here it's a little cool. It's gonna take a long time to heat. This middle part's pretty hot, so you'll melt a bit of glass pretty quick. If you get really close to this base, you'll just boil your glass, and that's not ideal. It's not a good look. So you wanna stay away from the very base of the flame. It's very, very hot. All right, so I'm gonna kind of get under this glob of glass right here, and I'm gonna use gravity. I'm gonna just drop it onto the mandrel, and I'm gonna spin the mandrel, and that's gonna give me a nice little starter bead. So the more material you put on this, the bigger your bead's gonna be. All right, so I want a little bit bigger, so I'm gonna melt a little bit more material. And so all my material is coming from this bead rod right here. So I can't neglect that bead. If I just chill outside the flame for too long with this bead, it will go through thermal shock and it will pop. So I have to keep it warm. The way I keep it warm is go back to the flame. Just get some heat on there. All right, I don't need it too hot. I want it a little bit more stable so I can pick up this last amount of glass. I'm just gonna roll it onto the bead like that. All right. So I'm gonna set my bead rod down, and I'm gonna set the hot part away from me. So anytime I need to pick that back up, I know the cool side's on my side, so I can just go for it and not hurt myself by picking up the hot side. All right, so now I wasn't very worried about my shape. See how that doesn't look like a very nice bead shape? Because I was just adding material. So now that I have all my material, I can get it hot. And you see me changing my angle of my mandrel. I'm just using gravity to help me shape the bead. All right, so if I get it hot and I turn and I control my angle, this will turn into a pretty decent bead. All right, the shape will be even. I'm not using any tools. I'm just using heat and gravity. Keep it turning. Even though you're not in the flame, it's still moving, all right? So if you're not in the flame, you still want to keep it turning. If you stop turning, gravity's gonna take over and it's just gonna hit the ground, okay? So now that it's firming up and I got a decent bead shape, won't you focus? All right, I'm gonna let this cool off. I'm gonna start adding my other color. Again, in and out of the flame, so we don't do thermal shock. Thermal shock's bad, it makes, you know, glass pop. So in and out of the flame, kind of quick, and I'm using the very tip of the flame. It's the cooler part of the flame, like if you can call flame cool. I can't neglect this bead though. This bead gets too hot because I'm focused on what I'm doing, something else I'm doing, it's gonna get cold and it's gonna crack. So again, I have to keep this warm as well, all right? So the way I do that is something called a flash. I'm just gonna put it in the heat, just to soak some heat in there so it doesn't get too cold. So it's just called flash, I'm just flashing the bead. So it's just going in the heat for a small period of time. That's what a flash is. So if anyone tells you to flash the bead, that's what they're talking about. Get some heat on the bead, because if it gets too cold, it's gonna crack. All right, so I'm just gonna use this other color to add dots. All right, so I don't need to melt a giant glob like I did the last color. I'm just gonna use dots, so it's just gonna be pretty simple. Try not, it's fun putting dots on beads, but you can get your focus taken away and you just keep adding dots, and then you forget about your base bead, gets too cold and it's gonna crack, okay? So do a couple dots, flash a bead, put some more heat on there, and then you can continue with your dots. When you use your dots, you're gonna connect it and pull. You can pull as far as you can with glass and it will stretch as long as it has heat. The way we separate the glass, this glass from the bead, is we're gonna use the torch, kind of like a scissors. It'll cut the little strand right off. All right, so it's gonna look like this. So out of the heat, dot, cut, dot, cut. Again, so put some dots on there. It's not gonna focus. All right, but don't get too carried away. You can always go back to your dots, but it's really hard to fix a cracked bead or a popped bead, okay? So every once in a while, just go back to your flame, and then you can go back to your dots. So I flashed it, so that gives me the ability to go back to my dots. See how I'm using the flame just to cut that little strand? That's my dots. All right, and it's pretty textured right now, and that's a good look. If you want the texture like that, you can just put the bead away and call it good. I'm just gonna show you what it looks like when you melt it all down. All right, so I'm getting it hot, just like the original. After I was done with all my glass, I just got it really hot. I didn't use any tools. Just got it hot, kept it turning. Change your angle a little bit. And then you're gonna get a much more even bead this way. And anything you make in the hot shop or over in the beads, you're never gonna see them until the next day. It needs an annealing cycle. So annealing cycle is about, I don't know, 15 hours or so. So it has to cool off. So annealing is coming down, cooling off very slowly. So it's gonna sit in the annealer at 960, and then it'll be at room temperature by the next day. So that's what it looks like with no texture, and the dots are just melted all the way in. All right, so I'm gonna let this cool off a little bit. You don't wanna put it away too hot. If you put it in an annealer too hot and it touches someone else's bead, they'll actually fuse. So you don't want that. You wanna let it cool off a little bit. When the color starts coming back, see how it's not as orange and you can actually see the true color? That's how you know it's cool enough that you can put it away into the annealer.